Yeah, well, you heard who I am. I'm Steph Carter. My pronouns are they, them, and I am a games researcher and accessibility consultant. I'm also neurodivergent and a massive language nerd. So today I'm going to be talking about accessible language in games. So to start with, I want to talk about the role of language in gameplay. Language isn't just dialogue or written text, it's everywhere in the game worlds we build. It's the interface between the system and the player, and it helps them build mental models of the game world and how they need to interact with it. It's menu text, it's dialogue, it's tooltips, it's quest logs, it's patch notes. It's everywhere. And what about language in terms of cognition, and cognitive accessibility? Well, language has its own area in cognitive function, which means that language can also be impacted when it comes to cognitive differences and cognitive impairments. And the use of language can also interact with the other domains of cognitive function. So something that we generally want to avoid when it comes to cognitive accessibility is putting our players into cognitive overload. So that happens when there is more information than someone can process, making it hard to process it all, and usually ends up with some sort of emotional or sometimes physical strain on the player. And why does this matter in particular for neurodivergent players? Well, when we have inaccessible language and it's causing cognitive overload for our players, it can lead to things like a change in performance or behavior. It can lead to things like difficulty making decisions if they're not certain how to make the decision due to the language. And it can also lead to frustration and ultimately disengagement. And that could be temporary, just for a session, or it could be complete disengagement in the game. I'm never touching that again. So clear and accessible language is really important to help reduce this friction that we have across multiple areas of gameplay, because ultimately games are very cognitively taxing. Who else benefits from accessible language? Well, everyone. When we design for access needs, we design a better experience for everyone else as well. But just to pick out a few examples, younger children, so any games that younger children can play, have a developing literacy level. So if we have clear, accessible language, they can play our games. People with English as a second language who want to play the game in English, the language it may have been developed in. And also tired parents with screaming children who just want to have a break for an hour and play a game. So as part of my talk, I'm going to be talking about some good and bad examples from games I have played. That does not mean that other ones do not exist. It's just my lived experience. To start with, I want to address dense and disorganized text. So this is more about the presentation of the language. Long blocks of information that are delivered all at once without any sort of structure or visual or grammatical breaks. On the left, I have an example from Pillars of Eternity, which actually had quite a helpful language glossary, which is good for other reasons I'll cover later. But it's quite densely presented, and it's also it's laid on top of quite dense text as well. And this relies, on me having to kind of reread the same line over and over, and it's quite difficult to process and navigate what I'm doing. So what I do instead is I don't read it, which is not ideal. On the right, we have Sudoku, which is a gacha game. A problem that one had was that the text would be too long and it would have to be displayed in the next text box. And there was no way to go back and repeat the text or any sort of history for me to look at. And when it cuts off mid-sentence, like it does in the picture, I have to then remember the other half of the sentence to be able to comprehend it fully, which is not great for my cognitive load. Another example I have, so I have two examples, Monster Hunter World and Monster Hunter Wilds. So in the Monster Hunter World, one of the older games, there were a lot of menus that they had to navigate, but the language itself was quite organized and clear. Whereas in Monster Hunter Wilds, on the right, they reduced the amount of menus, which is good that they did because it's more accessible in other ways for cognition. but it's quite disorganized and difficult to locate what you need. There's no particular order to the text. Like it's not alphabetical or anything. So when I'm playing Monster Hunter Wilds and I'm in a rush and I just want to forge or upgrade some armor, what I do is I just click on the one that looks kind of right and just hope that's the one I wanted. So there's a lot of guessing and backtracking when I'm playing this game. My final example for this one. So I've taken Oblivion, original and remastered, and it's the same vampiric nightmare that they give to you when you contract vampirism. So on the left, you can see what it used to look like in the original, where the text is quite tightly wrapped inside the text box, and it causes sentences to spill over multiple lines. And again, you get this problem of, well, you're rereading the same line over and over, and you might lose track of what the sentence is trying to say. There's also no differentiation between the button, the done, and the rest of the text, which just means I have to work that little bit harder to make that separation myself. Whereas in Oblivion Remastered, so it's exactly the same text, but they've made the text box a bit bigger. The text is quite small on screen, but it can be made bigger, I promise. And there's this clear distinction between this confirm button and the rest of the text. So very little had to be changed, but the overall experience is better. And I'm actually able to enjoy the immersion of having this vampiric nightmare. The next thing I want to talk about is unclear or unfamiliar language. And I've picked one of my favorite games, Overwatch. So this is when language is not distinct, clear, or familiar enough to understand what it's referring to. And I took a patch note that I still don't know what it says. So if anybody else knows what it's trying to say, can you tell me in the break, please? But the main problem there was with this patch note is that, you know, a lot of the meaning is shoved to the end of the sentence, and the noun phrase is too long. But also they're using a lot of terminology that the developers know what it means, but it doesn't mean the players know what you're referring to. So even when they've added the developers comment, it's not really that helpful in the grand scheme of things, you know, in describing the change they want to communicate to the players. I also have an example from their controls menu. So they used to have a few of these, but you know, they had the audacity to make the game better before I did this talk. So I've just picked one example where you've got two words that sort of negate one another, toggle hide, or the players' names. And when I read this, I have to stop for a second and go, okay, so am I toggling to hide the players? Am I hiding the play? What's happening here? When really they could have used probably one or the other, and that would have been fine. And when I'm reading a large list of, you know, menu controls and whatnot, this can be, you know, I'm just not going to interact with it. And when it's an accessibility menu, for example, that could be really important for me because of my other cognitive needs. This is a positive example from Avowed, where they have a language glossary, not too dissimilar to what Pillars of Eternity have, where they have along the side some of the language-specific stuff that exists in this world explained, and you can go through it and see what each thing means, and you can toggle it on and off as well, so you don't have to keep looking at it. But it means that, you know, if I'm not certain what a word means in context, I can still have the immersion that I want in this fantasy setting. And finally, and definitely not the least of them all, that's not what I meant. So this is when there is a mismatch between the choice and the outcome of an action due to either the content that's shown to me, or the tone, or the structure of the language. So I have some examples on screen. I don't want to spoil games for anyone, even though these are a few years old. But I have Detroit Become Human, The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt, and Wolf Among Us as some famous ones that have been problematic for a lot of players, not just the neurodivergent ones, as they don't communicate what exactly that choice is going to do. So this is a problem on in its own, but the reason it's an access problem is because I'm autistic, and planning and expectations are really important to me, especially when it comes to narrative-driven games. I plan everything very carefully. It's part of why I enjoy it. And having this mismatch is enough to make me completely disengage or restart the conversation, which is something I can't do in real life, unfortunately. But, it's still something I don't want to do in a game. So another example, Fallout 4, when it first released, had quite uninformative dialogue choices. They were quite misleading in tone or content, and then people would get quite frustrated because they click on something thinking, oh, like, brave of you. I'm not necessarily going to get sarcasm in that. So I'm going to click on that and be like, oh yeah, I'm complimenting them. And when actually it was a very sarcastic, quite mean thing that they said after that. And, and then I felt mean. Yeah, so game modders actually fix this by just showing the full line of dialogue. So having a bit more context and making it similar to the Fallout games of previous to them, prior to them, was really helpful. It's still not perfect though. I think combining that with something like what Dragon Age Veilguard did, with the dialogue wheels having icons to help you understand the tone, which is also not a perfect solution on its own. But also any important choices will appear as a prompt to make it clear what the outcome would be. So in this one, if I click Never Lonely, I know that I'm committing to an exclusive relationship with Emmerich, and maybe I don't want to do that. Maybe I just want to flirt a little bit with the old necromancer. So I'm going to quickly go through some tips that could potentially help make language more accessible. But just remember that, that it's not going to work just because you add it into your game. Like, it will interact with different mechanics and whatnot. So let the players control the place. Let them replay, let them skip, let them pause. Then you're not having to rely on me memorizing everything, and it's just a better time. Separate key information from the flavor text. Consider alternative ways to present language. Do you want, some people prefer just audio, some people prefer visual, some people prefer both. So if you can give them that option, even better. Use clear, unambiguous language in instructions and other moments of guidance. No idioms or metaphors where you can, and display sentences and actions in full when appropriate. Keep terminology consistent and distinct. Write clear choice labels, please, so I know what I'm doing. Even if it's just tell me what the tone is, that would be great. Highlight and bold important information. Toggle any extra content so that I have control over the space, so I don't have too much language, too much information. And then finally, use meaning first sentence structure. I shouldn't have to wait to the end of the sentence to figure out what you're trying to say to me, which is something I wish academics knew when they ask questions on talks. So does this hurt creativity? No. So I don't want to play a game that doesn't have creative language out of it. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that clear, accessible language, small changes to your language, that can help me access what you intended for me in this experience or this interactive, gameplay. You want me to understand what you meant, right? So just do it. I'm not going to read this out because it'll take too much time, but here are just some questions that can help guide the design process when considering accessible language. Just because you add it in doesn't mean it's going to work. The language does interact with the game mechanics and what type of game it is. So it's important to just question at every step, whether the language is appropriate for everyone. So some takeaways. Language is core to accessibility and an important part of the game world. Small changes go a long way in making that language accessible. And accessibility and creativity are not opposites, as they're collaborators in the design process. And thank you. I'm looking for a placement if anybody wants to talk to me after this. Yeah, thanks for listening.